Hey, good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our friends from Serverless Office Hour. I know that you're used to different hosts, but today I will be your host. I'm Giuseppe Battista. I'm a senior solutions architect. I usually host a stream about startups, but today I am here with Anton and Gators, and I have the incredible pleasure of talking about something that I think customers have been asking us for a very, very long time, actually having the possibility of doing dynamic routing through API gateway with HTTP headers. So I've been asked to bring on the show Anton Engagers because I have written a fantastic blog post. I think it was back in when was it? It was back in August or something like that. I will be sharing the link soon in the chat. But folks, before we start, Anton Engagers, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is at AWS, and what brings you here. Let's start with Anton.
Sure, absolutely. Hey everyone, good to be here again. I'm still Anton, still based in Austin, Texas. Finally getting some cool weather here today. Still principal solutions architect for serverless, not going anywhere. Yeah, I've been dealing with serverless for many years. I love this technology. I cover large ISV, primarily customers in United States, North America, right? And what I really like about this specific job, this specific segment, is the scale. I think that's kind of the key word, right? Scale, scale, scale. We're not talking about 10 requests a second or 100 requests a second. We're talking about 10,000, 100,000 requests per second. That's the fun part.
Wow. And how about Gatrius? What is it that brings you here? What do you do at AWS?
Hey, I'm Gedrus. I'm specialist solutions architect, like Anton. I cover strategic accounts at AWS. I'm based out of Oakland or San Francisco Bay Area in California. Weather is as nice as in Austin. I think so. Yeah, it's sunny outside. So yeah, I work with large customers, with strategic customers, and also I spend a lot of time. I'm passionate about APIs and integration services. So I spend a lot of time working with various customers on API implementations and scale, governance, maintenance at scale, management at scale. So those are topics that come really often. How do you build composite APIs? How do you build APIs that will scale? How do you control, let's say, blast radius? How do you switch into multi-account so you do not build too big to fail implementation? Because you don't want to put, your entire business on a single API in a single account where any misconfiguration will bring down your entire company front door on the internet. So those are questions that we deal a lot uh, with those large customers.
Sounds great. And folks, you heard it. We have absolute experts here on our show today. So please, if you have any questions, I will be your ambassadors. I will try to bring in the most interesting question from the chat box. Again, we're streaming on YouTube and Twitch, so please do feel free to have your voice heard. But I'll leave it to Anton and Gedrius to maybe talk a little bit more about this latest release from API Gateway and maybe have a look at some customers' use cases. I know that there is a demo incoming, so super curious to see how we can make use of this new feature.
Okay. If you worked with API Gateway, you know that we have this custom domain names feature and also multi-level base path mapping where you can specify which paths should be mapped to which endpoints, kind of a routing feature in front of API Gateway endpoints. We had that for forever. And it was path-based only, so you could always specify that whenever a request comes in and it's pointing to, it's heading to /orders, for example, route that request to orders endpoint, or if it's /products, route it to a different one. And it can be orders v1 or products v2 that you are routing, but at the same time, it's path only. So if you needed at any point, if you needed any additional routing based on a header, what customers used to do at that point is, okay, let's put application load balancer behind API gateway and use that as a secondary routing mechanism. For example, if you want to implement multi-tenant routing and you want to route based on tenant, or if you want to implement multiple versions of the same resource and you do not want to use paths, but let's say you want to use header values, media type, or just x-API version, for example, custom header, and based on that header value, go to one API endpoint versus another. Similarly, for different scenarios, like how do I do A/B testing? We have path override examples with CloudFront and Compute at Edge, like Lambda at Edge or CloudFront functions, where you inject cookie head into the request and also rewrite path or rewrite request URI. But again, all those add additional complexity, additional resources to be added, additional operational overhead, cost in many cases. So not something that you would really want to do if you can avoid it. So this release where we back in June, where we released option to include headers, and actually it's not just headers; it can be combination of headers and path, and or both of them, or just one of them, either headers or path. But that added flexibility that wasn't in place before, and since that time, our customers can use that feature for various implementations. Really, that use case depends on what they're trying to build, and we can go with Anton and deeper end of the pool discussing each of those use cases, what a typical implementation would look like. Anton?
Yeah, that's quite interesting, right? You just mentioned use cases, right? It's always about the use case, right? We're not doing this for fun. We're doing this because there are requirements, right? And we'll show you the demo. We'll show kind of how you can leverage this feature, talk about the implementation specifics, right? But the first question is always why? Why would you need that, right? And there are, like, even before you go to how this is implemented, right? There are very common, very typical scenarios that we see across the board for, I think it's safe to say, vast majority of customers, right? We can start with simple things like API versioning, right? If you do not have a properly versioned API, oh man, you're up for a surprise in a few months or a few years, right? When suddenly your business comes and says, oops, we need to implement something that breaks the functionality. But we got those like 10 million existing clients connecting to our API. Well, yeah, but there is a new business requirement, right? So it's important to have a proper versioning on your API. And, that's a business, well, let's say in between business and technical requirement, API versioning, right? But if you look realistically at the industry, there are so many ways this can be implemented, right? There are vendors, major vendors that use HTTP header, right? From my experience, it's the most common, but it's definitely not the only option, right? That use HTTP header to specify API version, right? There are vendors that use it as part of their request path, right? So myapi.com/API/v1/whatever, right? It can be part of your request body. Unfortunately, I've seen that as well, right? So, host name, oh, that's a good one, right? It can be part of your host. So there is no like right or wrong, right? As always with architecture, there are pros and cons, and the usual it depends, right? But we do want to kind of tell the story of this is what we see as probably the optimal way of doing that, but we fully acknowledge it's not going to be the only way, right? So we wanted to make sure that the API gateway product that we have, right, the service, it actually supports more of the options that we see in the industry, right? And using HTTP header for that is definitely a common scenario. Now, it doesn't only kind of restrict it to API versioning, obviously, right? It can be many, many more different things, right? One of my favorite capabilities, when building cloud applications, is things like A/B testing. how do I, funnel 10% of the traffic to one deployment, right? While 90% is still using the original deployment. This is how I can test that my new functionality, maybe my new API, is actually operational without risking affecting the whole, like my tenant audience, right? So that's another scenario. And pretty much anything that can be controlled by looking at the request metadata, right? So with this new capability, we're allowing the users, the customers who are using API Gateway, to essentially leverage more of the options that are available in the request metadata, like HTTP headers and path, etc., to specify flexible routing, the key part, without actually maintaining additional infrastructure. So, I've seen customers who would put something like Nginx proxy behind API gateway to do some additional, let's call it smart or dynamic, whatever, routing, right? Well, now you can actually do it with no additional infrastructure, basically by adding some configurations to your API gateway. I think that's a very powerful statement and capability in general.
Yeah, so in the previous iteration, you would have had to add complexity and additional resources, additional infrastructure that you would have to maintain. But now it's just, I would say, just say a couple of lines of code in your CloudFormation template or in CDK. But I guess one of the questions that I always get from my customer is there any like additional cost involved into this when I'm processing these additional rules, for example?
No, there is no additional cost. API Gateway has just one, okay, and in most cases, it has just one cost associated. Is number of requests, and it's tiered also. More requests you use during the month, lesser the cost is. Also, with that, let's caveat that if you enable side cache, that's extra cost item from API Gateway. So with additional routing rules, you do not increase your cost. And if you split, let's say, your load across multiple endpoints for easier management or easier governance, if you want to, let's say, enforce rules who can access what on control plane side, not just who can request for which data, but also who can modify particular endpoints. For example, orders team, they may want to make sure that products team does not accidentally change anything in their API. So they can have two different endpoints, orders and products, managed by two different teams, maybe even two different platforms, one in Java, another in Python or Node, and so on and so on, and apply those rules at organizations, SAP, service control policies, or IAM policies, who can do what with those APIs on control side.
Yeah. And Giuseppe, like tiny nitpick. It's not code. You mentioned two lines, couple of lines of code. It's not really code. It's infrastructure as code, right?
Absolutely.
That's a powerful statement. So, using the first official industry terminology, it's not imperative code. It's declarative, right? So you declare what you want to achieve, right? And then the API gateway will actually build its routing mechanism based on your declaration, right? So it's a very powerful capability.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess, do we want to maybe start seeing it in action and bringing on some your screen readers and we can see how this works?
Yeah, sure. I have my screen shared, so whenever it's up, okay.
There you go.
So you see three APIs. So, and if you go to that blog post, if you scroll the way down to the repo link, you'll see the same. And in those three APIs, what you see, it's orders, one endpoint, another endpoint is products v1, and then there's products v2, and each of them is pointing to the separate Lambda function as an indication target, and it's just too large zoomed out. But anyways, and besides those APIs, I also have custom domain name specified. I created custom domain name test.gpk.cloud and created routing rules for those three APIs. So first rule is going to products when a request matches path products, and also when request contains header x-api-version with value v1. Now, one note that header matching is case insensitive, though value matching is case sensitive. So according to RFCs, it doesn't matter how you case your header names, but make sure, and then I can demo it later, that your values that you're matching are exactly as they come in. And then you have priorities specified, which rules, in which order those rules will be applied. So we have products with version v1, we have products with version v2, and also we have orders without any versioning. So that endpoint has all the requests coming in independent of version. And look, I already have, okay, let me clear it. Yeah, no surprise, I tested it before going live. So now if I go to, let's say, orders, I get response hello from orders. So that's coming from one endpoint. Now, similarly, if I go with version 1 of products, I just scroll and ask, I'm getting back a response from version 1, from Lambda function that responds with version 1. Now, as I mentioned, it is case sensitive. Now, if I simply specify that, okay, let's go with version 1, be uppercase. Okay, there is no response. It's forbidden. There is no catch-all path specified for products, so it doesn't know where to route. It just simply, there's no routing rule for this request. It will not go anywhere. And similarly for v2, it will go to products v2. Now, let's try to add that catch-all rule for products. Where is configure add routing rule? And if I choose that, let's say all requests that do not specify version of the products API, let's go to v1. And just note this strip base path checkbox or parameter when you specify an infrastructure as a code. One thing that happens is that in the base path mappings in the original one, before routing rules were introduced, a request that was sent to the backend would remove base path from the request. And so which means that when you get, if you go to slash products, it will come in without that base path. So to make sure that migration is straightforward and you can mimic the same functionality, same behavior as in the API base path mapping, routing rules allow you to strip that base path so it's not there. And let's add condition that if that has products and no header specified, in that case, it should go to products v1. Basically, if I don't know about new version, okay, let me keep using the old version. Next, add priority, let's say 3. So it's right after v1 and v2 explicit mentions, and create routing rule. And here it is, I have one more rule that the request matches path products, and if no version is specified, it should go to products v1. Let's go back to Cloud Shell, and let me try products without any header whatsoever. And it should take maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds to propagate those routing rules. Keep in mind, API Gateway is managed distributed service running on a fleet of something, some computer underneath. We didn't even know. That's a black box, let's call it this one. And it takes some time to get propagated. And while I was talking, it got there. So now if I send request without any version there, or actually if I send a request with v1 uppercase where it failed first time, now it should go to that catch-all rule for products. And you can implement that in many ways or for various endpoints. So you can have that mix and match of routing. And then if nothing works, here's my catch-all rule for this particular API. Similarly, as you see, you can go and change. So let's say now v1, I just decided that if nothing is specified as a version, I want all the users, all the requests to hit new version V2. So what I would do in that case, I would just go and edit this rule. What is my rule number 3? And if I edit and specify that it should go to products V2, you can think about it as a subset or smaller case of blue-green deployment, where nothing is affected, no downtime, nobody is affected until it goes into production. And after, again, if I keep hitting that endpoint, I should see V1 still coming back. And at some point, you see routing rule propagated. And now my responses are coming back from version 2 of the product's endpoint. So you can implement similar approach, and you can do that with API base path mappings or routing rules. So whenever you are deploying to make those safe deployments, as we call them, or zero downtime deployments, where there is no impact, and you do not depend really, let's say, on DNS caching time to live if you use DNS for blue-green deployments. Similarly, you can use this routing rules just to implement blue-green deployment or zero downtime deployment, where you switch instantaneously to new version. If you didn't like what happened, you can switch back almost instantaneously again. I would say always test everything. As Anton mentioned, you can do canary deployments. You can route 10% or 20% traffic and gradually increase that percentage of traffic to a particular endpoint or stage. Or if you already tested everything in your deployment pipeline and you maybe needed to pre-scale, pre-warm your resources that are behind that API, when you're ready, you can switch entire traffic immediately. And because it does not cost you anything to keep that endpoint, the old endpoint, in our case, we have V1 and V2 still running. But if you want to retire it at some point, if it doesn't cost you anything to keep it, you can keep safely a new version, even if it's not specified as version 2. Maybe it's just implementation in the back that changed, but your contract with your consumers of the APIs didn't change. So you do not change versioning of your API, you just change implementation. So switching between these two backend implementations that is transparent to your users can use this approach where you just switch routing rules and you are going with new version.
Sounds great. And so this seems pretty seamless. But let's say that I'm a very fatigued developer, like DevOps engineer, and I get woken up at 3 a.m. in the morning. Something is wrong with my previous deployment. Like, are there any additional features that we have, maybe from a perspective of observability? How would you go about like debugging maybe some issues with these configurations?
Yeah, definitely. So API Gateway has two types. So there are a few things. So when it comes to observability, you have this trifecta of three approaches. So you have traces, you have metrics, and you have logs. So with traces, you can always see, and as you enable that on all of those endpoints, it's a per endpoint basis. You enable tracing. And you see what requests are coming in and where they are failing, where your bottlenecks are. You can see that request going through all the steps along the path in serving that request. And similarly with logs, reminder, if you work with API Gateway, most likely you know it, but if you do not, there are two types of logs. One is API Gateway execution logs that go to CloudWatch, and another is API Gateway access logs. And by default, it goes to, if you do not specify anything otherwise, just CloudWatch log stream. But you also can stream access logs to Amazon Kinesis. And Amazon Kinesis data stream can be pointing to Firehose. Basically, your logs can be delivered to S3 bucket where you can use, for example, Amazon Athena to analyze and see what is going on. And also you can configure structure, you can configure format of those access logs, what should be included in the access logs. So these two log streams, they will be, again, basis of your observability. Execution logs, mostly for identifying what is happening with API Gateway as an engine. So you can also enable it to include all the data along the path, and you see how each individual request was processed. Okay, first of all, I checked authentication authorization, or if web application firewall is enabled, first of all, I pass that request to web application firewall. If it reaches API gateway, then I see authentication authorization. I check, let's say, if I have Lambda authorizer used as authorization solution from that API, did it check cache of authorization cache first? Did it send request to Lambda authorizer? Now, if I have side cache enabled, did it find anything in that side cache, or it was cache miss and a request was sent to the backend? How request looked like, all the headers, payload as it was sent to the backend. What kind of response I received from the backend? All those steps, all those bits and pieces of information, you'll see that in execution logs. Now, in access logs, you will see the information that you typically see in application server access logs. Where the request came from, what IP address was there, what protocol request looked like, and so on and so on. And you also can include, in addition to those bits and pieces about the request itself, you also can include some metrics values along, let's say, latency, integration latency, overall latency, how long did it take, and also response codes, how did it work. Now, one thing to keep in mind that in access logs, you do not have payload information. If you need to look into payloads, in that case, you would look into execution logs. But again, that's, I should say, just state warning that payload may include sensitive information that not every single person who has access to those logs should have access to. So be careful when you're enabling payload logging in execution logs. And also take a look at CloudWatch logs feature that anonymizes your logs. That is pretty much anonymizing this information, this sensitive information. You can specify, just switch on that plug.
That's also a really interesting way of like separating, right? So with this new feature, I think you can kind of separate the duties and not having to start putting your nose into the body of a request to actually understand where you're sending, where you were sending it. So I like it. Like it's I think again, like with security in mind, is an interesting feature to enable. But aside from the text itself, I know you folks have worked with many customers, and I wanted to ask you if you have seen any kind of best practices being put in place by these teams, or like some of the pitfalls that we should be aware of when actually operating this new feature in conjunction with API gateways, or in general with API gateway.
Yeah, I can start probably here. So, well, for the first best practice, right, let's also add something that I think the audience should be aware of, right? So the matching, right, the value matching that you see right now on your screens, right, that can also include wildcards, right? So you don't have to put exact value there, right? So it doesn't have to be like, take a look at the second rule, right? XAPI version doesn't have to be exactly v2. It can be asterisk v2, right? And you can have wildcard in front of the value, after the value, both, right? So this can be wildcard. So this gives you flexibility, right? But with great power, comes great responsibility. Okay, so while this is a session streamed across different platforms, and we obviously want to make it very visual, right? Please do not use console to change these configurations in your production environment. Okay, so your first best practice, right, would be manage these configurations exactly like you would manage code, right? Manage it with infrastructure as code. This way you have audit track of what changed, right? This way you can easily roll back, right? And all of that without having a human person, going to the console, right? Like, I like humans. Humans are fun. They're not reliable in production environments to touch things in live, environments. Sorry. So yeah, absolutely use infrastructure as code for managing these configurations. We provided a sample, the blog that we linked a few minutes back, right? It has a sample of implementation. So, get your hands dirty, play around with that, get a feeling. This feature is super simple, in a good way, right? It's so easy to use, right? So understand how it works, understand the behavior, right? But then manage it in your production environment using infrastructure as code, period. Now, another best practice I would probably mention here is you can see here that the rule priorities are 1, 2, 3, 300. Okay. Now, those routing rules, they support priorities anywhere from 1 to a million. Okay. Leave ample space between your priorities. Okay, so don't by default just go 1, 2, 3, 4. Go 100, 200, 300, or 1,000, 2,000, right? 3,000. You have a lot of kind of space there. It's anywhere from 1 to 1 million, but you don't know today about the requirements you might have tomorrow, next week, or next year, right? So if you define your priorities initially as 1, 2, and 3, it's going to be hard to inject, things in between if you're going to ever need them, right? Will you? I don't know. Maybe not. But in case you do, you've prepared your environment, right? You kind of took early steps in order to make it easier for you. And when you inject it, right? Let's say you had 100 and 200, right? Don't inject it at 101, right? So keep in mind you might still need ample space. Now, realistically, over time, right, that should give you enough safety space, enough buffer, right, to basically not being super concerned with, oh, now I need to change like 300 rules because I don't have any space between 235 and 236 anymore, right? So leave ample space. This will help you to kind of not have any problems in future, right? So your future you will tell you will say thank you to you, right? So those are probably the two most common things that I've seen, right? Besides the obvious test, 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 right? Gidris, I don't know if you want to add something.
I would remind this catch-all rule, and so many, especially in development environments, where you can have that as a catch-all warning page when you are testing to make sure that your all test cases include required headers. And if that required header is not included, you get some error instead that is more meaningful than just simply 401 or 403 in this particular case, where you would get forbidden if you do not have that header. So kind of more guiding towards compliance. Also, IAM policies, we talked about governance a little bit, about separating those. With this new feature, also new IAM policy action for permissions was introduced, API gateway create a routing rule. So if you want to have this permissions more granular, you can specify who, which role associated or identity can edit additional routing rules, because not everyone has to have access to this one, just to make sure that accidentally you do not deploy something that you shouldn't. That's one more thing. Also, keep in mind there are limits on how many rules you can put. Let's say in each of the conditions, you can have up to maximum 2 headers and 1 path value. So if you need more, you would have to specify more of those rules. But at the same time, think about that your condition cannot be overly complicated. You cannot include, I want to have this cookie and this version header and this tenant ID and this A/B testing state and so on. You would have to kind of think about in which order I will be inspecting those requests or routing those requests, applying routing rules, and maybe just if you need more than just two headers, start off okay, if this header is present, if it's AB, okay, just route it immediately to a particular endpoint and so on. So you will have to work around this quota of two, or limitation of two maximum two headers per condition and one path. And
Okay,
to be
sounds
honest,
great.
it shouldn't be that complicated in your routing rules.
Yeah, I mean, if probably if you need to have more than that, you probably want to resort to something that allows you more like configuration space, I guess. So that's probably not the right use case. Yeah, I guess the right question is, and maybe you already answered as well. Like, when should we stay away maybe from using this feature, and thinking of actually adding an extra layer of infrastructure in our architecture?
I would say that it should be a reflection of your API design and routing, not that much about your, let's say, I want to enable particular feature, for example, for some subset of users. You can use, let's say, feature flags for that, and then other approaches. It should not be your business logic that changes often that you are configuring as part of the routing rules. This is more of API design and API implementation, not that much of the business logic implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's declarative, right? So it's essentially a pattern matching, right? Now, if you have a scenario where you need highly dynamic, complex, sophisticated rules for making that routing decision, basically pattern matching, you actually need code, right? So, for example, I'm like brainstorming live right now, right? You need to go to a third-party system API, right? Send some values from the request metadata, and that system will give you a decision where that needs to be routed, right? So in this scenario, you probably need something more sophisticated than this routing, right? But in this scenario, kind of, usually you would already have something like that, right? To dynamically route. And that's where I manage the scenario where you would have a component like either in front or behind your API gateway making those complex routing decisions. It can be Lambda at edge. I don't know, right? There are, it's architecture. There are many ways to build things, right? But if your traffic routing can be governed by matching a particular patterns found either in header or like request path, right? This feature gives you a very low hanging fruit routing, right? Essentially, you literally just need to provide configuration, zero infrastructure management. You don't need to patch virtual machines, literally provide configuration, and it just works out of the box within few seconds the moment the configuration change is propagated, right?
Yeah, sounds good. And honestly, I had another question. But in your endless experimentation, have you managed to kind of break this, or like have you managed to like confuse, or like I know that I don't know, I always like kind of either code myself into a corner, or like I don't know, I always hit some kind of weird limits. So like, have you gone there? Like is there any way to break this?
I do not know about breaking. I can give you example of actually I worked with one of the customers like 2 weeks ago, where it's kind of a combination of uh, multi-level base path mapping and routing rules. And one thing that customers quite often overlook, because it's really down that list of limitations or restrictions or fine print on implementation, that multi-level base path mapping, when you use it and when it goes through that route, through that path of implementation or that approach of implementation, it converts, if it's multi-level, not a single level, if it's multi-level, it converts your header names into lowercase.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which is quite often overlooked. It's just, implementation detail. Here it is, fine print. Okay, this is kind of how it behaves. And now, in case of routing rules, casing is not affected. So now, if let's say, if your client expected headers in lowercase, and you migrated from multi-level base path mapping to routing rules, and now they're coming in mixed case, uppercase, anything but lowercase, now you can break your client because expectations were slightly different. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah. It's an interesting pattern, right? There are some products that keep case sensitivity for header names, even though according to RFC they're not supposed to be case sensitive. There are other products that keep them very case sensitive in different ways. Like if I recall correctly, Node.js will just put everything to lowercase. It doesn't matter what's the case of incoming header name, not value name, right? If I recall correctly, Node will just lowercase everything, right? So. Yeah.
And also, it depends on protocol that you are using. Let's say if you try with curl, just to add request in HTTP 2 versus HTTP 1.1, you may see different header casing right there, even if it's the same endpoint.
I'm actually curious. Like I was thinking, how can we take this question? Because I love this question, right, Giuseppe?
Oh no,
whenever
something.
we're internally, me, Gidrius, like a lot of our peers, whenever we're getting our hands on like early pre-launch versions of these new capabilities, we test them a lot, right? We try to break things, and this leads to fun experiments, right? So yeah, this was an interesting question. I wanted to kind of spin this in a little bit more in a different direction, right? Still about breaking, right? But how can actually the users, like the adopters of API Gateway, how can they start leverage this capability, start adopting it without breaking their APIs? Because we're talking about something like brand new here, right? And let's be very kind of transparent about that. There are thousands, if not millions, like tens of thousands of customers using API Gateway today, right? I don't even know what the number is, right? It's huge. With existing APIs. So how can they start leveraging these new capabilities in a safe way? And this was actually a major consideration when we designed this feature, right? How can so it wouldn't be all or nothing, right? Because there is an older way of doing, well, now it's older, right? Previously, it existed for years, right? Let's call it previous. Older has a bad connotation. Previous way of doing things, which is still fully relevant today. It's not going anywhere, right? API mappings, right? And thousands of customers are using it, right? But now there is a new way of doing things, which can still, look at the path, right? But it's also more powerful, right? It can also account for errors, etc., right? So we've kind of tried to think what would be the best option, right? So how can we provide experience of customers migrating to this new option, right? But without breaking, right? And the way we address that is, when you start using, when you want to start using this routing mode, right? Routing rules, you can configure the routing mode of your API, right? And we support 3 modes. So by default, nothing changes, right? It's API mappings, right? If you already defined API mappings, that's the default mode. We did not change the default. So, we launched this feature, nothing breaks, nothing changes, right? We're not shifting the kind of ground under you, right? We keep it as is, right? But you can go and change the routing mode from API mappings to something we call routing rules and then API mappings, right? So basically new way and then fall back to the old way. So what it actually means is if you have created routing rules, we're gonna look at them first. If any of them gonna match, we're gonna do whatever is defined in that routing rule. But if there are no matches, and you remember like about 20 minutes ago, Gidris showed there is no catch all, right? There is no fallback mechanism, right? So in this intermediate kind of routing mode, right, essentially what we're saying is we're gonna look at routing rules. If we don't find a matching routing rule, we're gonna fall back on the previous way of doing things, right? API mappings, right? This way you can enable this mode and start gradually transitioning to the new routing rules, right? And you know that if none of the routing rules were triggered, you're back into your existing API mappings and they still work, right? And once you've completed this transition fully, or if you're starting with the new API, like from scratch, you don't need any backward compatibility, and you want to use the latest and greatest from day zero, right? You can enable routing rules only mode, right? Where basically API mappings will not be considered at all, right? So we've tested a lot, right? This functionality, or there are a lot of testing behind it, right? And the idea was that we'll provide adopters of API Gateway a path, right? Which, regardless where they are on this path, whether they're already a heavy user of API Gateway or just starting, right? They can start leveraging this new capability in a safe way without breaking anything, right? So the default doesn't change. There's a path for gradually transition to the new way, right? And no one is forcing you to, you shall do it by this date, right? You can keep, new stuff on routing rules, old stuff on API routing, right? It's up to you. How do you transition your own pace, right? Or you can say, nope, I'm going to be using the new stuff only. Okay, I'm creating a new API. I don't care about backward compatibility. I'm only going to be using routing rules, right? So that is a kind of safe mechanism for customers to start adopting this. In the blog that we've referenced like a few times earlier today, we actually have a section that literally talks about onboarding scenario. Yeah, I always like to do bloggers, look at this corner, we'll have a link there.
Yeah.
There's a section dedicated to onboarding this new capability, header-based routing, right, and routing rules. And it actually talks about, a fictitious company, right, fictitious organization that started with the old way of doing things, right, old way, right. I don't want to call it
Previous is fine.
Previous is better, right? Because again, it's not going anywhere, right? It's still very valid way of doing things, right? Previous way of doing things, but now they're gradually transitioning to header-based routing.
Sounds great. And I guess the last question I had is about like the developer experience, right? So we talked about this is a declarative way of like changing the behavior of API gateway. So right now this is supported by CloudFormation. Is it also available in the CDK?
I don't remember from the top of my head. I know that the plan was to make it available. You know how it works, right? We initially release it with usually CloudFormation, and then over the next few weeks or months, we add support for additional infrastructure as code tools. I can double check that. I don't remember from the top of my head, Gidrius.
Yeah.
No, I should have checked actually before the call, but yeah, I didn't check if CDK supports it.
Okay. Does anybody in the chat actually know if it's supported by CDK? If you already played with it, please do let us know. And I guess maybe, folks, how about we maybe zoom in onto the article, because there was an interesting section in which actually we're actually showing the code. I can actually send you the link and we can share it. So maybe we can have a look at that before we go. Let me see. I don't know, Gedrius, if you can have a look at that, because there was an interesting there were like some interesting paragraphs on how like the various type of matches and for prefix and suffix. So there, if you zoom in a little bit and you scroll down, I think to what we find, we start finding some of the CloudFormation snippet that I think something that the audience would find interesting. So like this folks is how you actually encode it and you make it available in your CloudFormation template. I know you folks have shared the SAM template, I guess in the repo. But can you comment on maybe how have you seen like teams actually adopting this, the type of redirection or routing architecture that they've put in place?
Yeah, so as we mentioned at the beginning, those use cases, the main use case, the adoption, most obvious adoption versioning, header-based versioning, where you can simply at that point switch your header-based versioning from application load balancer behind API gateway to updated routing rules and eliminate need of that application load balancer. So that's most obvious scenario and most straightforward adoption of this one. Also, it can be host name based routing. It can be cookie based routing. Really, if you have some if you have some API implementation that routing would depend on some cookie or host name, especially when you build composite ones. Think about maybe a small set of vanity domains and you want to implement it. Though I would say that if you're going with vanity domains and it's small set, it's not going to stay for long small. So you will hit limits of routing based on host names. Just go right from the beginning and implement that in the backend. And we have plenty of resources on how to build SaaS architectures, ISV architectures for a large number of tenants. That's another, we cannot prevent if our customers are doing that and then implementing that routing in front. Also in the blog post we mentioned cell architectures routing. Again, one of the use cases. I know we disagree at what scale it will be impractical. You may start with that, but eventually you'll need to move away from cell-based architecture implementation using header-based routing for various reasons. First of them would be resiliency, because cell-based architectures would be implemented across multiple accounts as a cell as a container on your account and multiple regions. So that's where it becomes overly complicated to use it. So gradual rollouts, A/B testing, blue-green deployments, and most likely your versioning. So that's where adoption is happening. Anton, have you seen any other use cases in the wild?
No, that's probably what I wanted to cover as well, right? Yeah, I see like API versioning and blue-green A/B, right? Basically gradual, right? Let's generalize it to gradual, right? That's the primary use cases I've seen so far. Keep in mind, this feature is barely 3 months old, right? So it takes time, for everyone to adopt it, right? And I really hope we'll see a lot more usage in future as well, right? Because there is a good adoption at this point, and we hope to see even more adoption. This is
and nature of APIs is that you do not touch your APIs too often if you can avoid it, because that's your front door and that's your contract with your consumers. So typically, API feature adoption wouldn't be that fast.
Sounds great. So, Anton Gedius, thank you so much for sitting with us at the Serverless Office Hours. This has been a dynamically routing request with Amazon API Gateway and routing rules. So, folks, I've been your host, Giuseppe Battista. I don't know if I'll be on this show the next week, but we will see what Julian and the other hosts help us pack for our next episode. But please do tune in next week, the same time across all of the time zones. Again, Gedris and Anton, thank you so much for spending your precious time and sharing your wisdom and knowledge around API Gateway. And hopefully I'll see you next week. And I'm going to close the stream right now. Folks, thank you so much and bye-bye. Oh.